Hello again, and welcome back to another one of our online lectures. In this unit, we are studying Mesoamerica. And basically, what we're going to look at here very briefly is five civilizations. We've already, very surface level, covered the Olmec and Zapotec, but now we're going to get into the big three. We're going to look at the Mayas, the Incas, and the Aztecs. Now, the Incas are the one that really doesn't fit because they're not actually in Mesoamerica, but there's a lot of similarity in culture and in time period. So we do put them together with this unit. So, we do have our one constructive response question here, and the question simply is, who are the Maya or Mayas or Mayans, depending on which way you say it? Who are the Maya and what did they do? So I'm going to give you a basic overview of who the Mayans were, and we'll be able to answer that question by the time we're done with this today. Now, what you should be doing is every one of you should have received a Mesoamerica chart. And what you're going to do is you're just going to fill in information under each one of these categories as we go through each one of these cultures. Today we're simply going to look at the Mayans, so we'll be able to fill in a lot of information as we go along here. So the information on your chart will be environment, cities, language and writing, economy, government, religion, and achievements. And we're going to look at all of those, and through this we're going to understand who the Maya were and what did they do. If you have not seen the episode of Engineering an Empire on the Mayas, there's two really good reasons to watch it. Number one, it is very informative, shows you all the major cities and the things that the Mayans built, talks a little bit about what we think might have happened to the Mayans at the end. But really the main reason to watch it is it has the single greatest Peter Weller moment of all time in it. So my classes should have seen this already. But if you haven't watched this, if you're outside the district, definitely want to take a look at this. A very good episode of Engineering an Empire from the History Channel. All right, so what we want to do here is we want to start out by really kind of refamiliarizing ourselves with what Mesoamerica is. Mesoamerica is this area right here kind of in the southern tip of Mexico, really into the Yucatan Peninsula. That's what this area is here. Now, so you have the Gulf of Mexico. If I went straight north here, I'd hit the United States, I'd hit Louisiana, I'd hit Texas. But right down here, this is the Yucatan Peninsula. You have Guatemala down here. This is where the Mayas were located. In fact, four of our different civilizations are on this map. In green, we have the Mayas. In red, we have the Olmec, who we talked about the other day. In this yellow color, you have the Zapotec, who are based out of here, the Oaxaca Valley out of Monte Alban. And in brown here, you have the Aztecs, who are based out of Teotihuacan and Tenochtitlan. So I want you to know that there's a lot of cultures here very similar to each other and in close proximity to one another. Of course, they're going to borrow from each other very heavily. So we've already started by looking at the Olmec and Zapotec. Let's take a look at who the Mayas were. We're going to start with their environment. Environment matters. We always talk about geography. You've heard me say that. This is southern Mexico. Specifically, as mentioned on the previous slide, it's at the Yucatan Peninsula. Now, what really sets this area apart from other areas is a lot of jungles. And the jungles are not exactly the best place for a civilization to begin and thrive, because with the thick jungles, you don't get a lot of sun penetration to the ground, making agriculture somewhat difficult. Of course, it can be very hot. It rains almost year-round here. There's a lot of water to deal with. So it's not the best place for a civilization to begin and thrive, but yet it happened. There's also some cool mountains. Obviously, the higher you get in elevation, the cooler the air gets, so you've got some cool mountains in this region as well. We want to take a look at this from a satellite image. You can see kind of right in this region, there is a lot of green. Down here, there's a lot of green, and those are those thick, dense jungles that I was talking about here that will play host to the Mayas. Okay, take one more look at this map. There's three main cities that we're going to talk about here with the Maya culture. They were never a unified empire. That's something we should mention right away. They were a collection of city-states. But the three main cities that we're going to talk about here are Tikal. Oh, my cursor disappeared. There it is. Tikal, which is right here. Palenque, which is right here. And Chichen Itza, which is way up here in the north. And again, the reason I definitely stress watching Engineering and Empire is that that particular video talks about all three of these cities in quite a bit of detail. And so they were three of the main city-states of the Maya culture. So we're just going to put, for cities, we're going to list those three cities here: Tikal, Palenque, and Chichen Itza. This particular building here is in Tikal. Tikal's got some very, very beautiful architecture, some beautiful buildings. Peter Weller talked about the Temple of the Inscription, and actually went inside of that in Palenque. So some very unique and beautiful buildings still exist there today. Of course, 100 years ago, they were all covered in dirt. They were all covered in vines. We didn't know they were there. And they've been since uncovered and somewhat preserved, so people can go view them and certainly enjoy them. Here's another image of Tikal. This is what we think it would have looked like during its time. Notice how the buildings are red. They would have been covered in sort of a red paint to give them sort of an artistic element to them. And here's some of the temples that were built in Tikal. Here is the Castillo in Chichen Itza. Very, very beautiful building. Again, watch Engineering and Empire. They're going to tell you all about what all the different panels mean and all the different steps mean and how different times of the year the shadows make it look like a serpent's coming down these stairs. It's really, really pretty cool what the Mayas were able to achieve by building some structures like this. Here's another picture of Palenque. This is the Temple of the Inscription that Peter Weller goes in, but just another really beautiful city. What's really unique, though, about these cities is how much water they have. And they have water kind of all around. There's not only rivers, but there's lots of rain, and dense jungles, which certainly brings water. So they had to build these water channels, which in a way I'm kind of getting ahead of myself with the achievements. But this image was given to me by a group of Elk River students who went on a missions trip into Maya territory. And so this is a former student of mine here, and she was able to see these water channels. And so they were able to carry water away from the city because they had too much of it. So that's pretty cool. It's something else that the Mayas built. In terms of language and writing, they had the most advanced writing system in the Americas. And it's no shock to us when we see what they were able to do. They created 800 glyphs. Glyphs are like hieroglyphics. I mean, they're essentially the same thing. They're pictures or symbols that stand for words or phrases. And you can see here in this image on the right, lots of different images here of glyphs. And what we do know is that they were able to put a lot of this information into codices or codex. And these codex, very few of them actually survived. Many of them were actually destroyed by missionaries who came into this area. So what these codexes or codices were records. And so we know a lot about who the Mayas were because of these records. Unfortunately, only 3 of them exist today, but with those 3, we were able to ascertain quite a bit of information. It's just another picture of some of the different hieroglyphics that the Mayas created. Of course, each one of these would have meant something, but look how intricate and very elaborate they are. Each one of these would have had to have been very carefully created by an expert carver, because certainly if you change anything on here, it could change the meaning of what your glyph stands for. As for their economy, their cities, which were city-states like I mentioned, were linked by trade. Some of the things that they traded were salt and flint, feathers, shells, and honey. Pretty easy things to find in this region, salt maybe being the exception to that rule. Salt is good for a lot of things. It's good for food, but it's also good for preservation of meat. Back then they wouldn't have had any type of refrigeration. Jade, you can see jade, and this is something that Peter Weller talks about in Engineering and Empire, so again, you should definitely check that out. Jade's a very cool green material that can be carved and shaped into lots of different jewelry and things like that. But one of the things that was used as currency was the cacao bean, or as we would call it, the cocoa bean. So essentially, an early version of chocolate here became the currency for the Maya people. In terms of government, they were ruled by god kings, like the pharaohs of Egypt. They were a theocracy. So those kings that were at the top of their pyramid, you can kind of see from this little image over here, definitely would have been the religious leaders as well. As I mentioned, their government was ruled by city-states. They were never a unified empire. You never had one Mayan ruler who ruled all the entire territory. That did not happen. We know that dynasties were important, meaning that fathers passed on their power to their sons, and their sons passed their power on to their sons, and so on and so forth. So we know they believed in dynasties, which means they didn't have elections, they didn't have democracy. And we know at the top there was definitely a rich noble class. Sometimes these were religious leaders as well, but we know that there was a noble class near the top of their social pyramid. Religion. They were definitely polytheistic. They believed in multiple gods. You can see this image here on the right, glyphs of the 9 Maya gods. We know the jaguar factored in very heavily into this. Kind of depends on what city-state you were in, but they definitely believed in a lot of different gods. There was a lot of blood offerings, both sacrificial and just blood. We know that they believed in human sacrifice. The Aztecs are going to take this to a little bit more of an extreme, but there's no doubt that human sacrifice played into what the Mayas did. You rip the heart out and cut the head off to try to appease the sun god, and again, it kind of gets confused with the Aztecs a little bit, but both of those cultures believed in human sacrifice. But when we get to the Aztecs, we'll actually look at that more deeply. So if you have to try to help clarify this in your own mind, human sacrifice was definitely more heavy on the Aztec side, and then we'll talk about that in our next lecture. This is just a same trip from the Elk River kids. A former student of mine said she was able to lay on this altar. Her tour guide told them this was a human sacrifice altar. So I said, did that feel kind of creepy laying there? And she said, yeah, yes it did. Just knowing that many people were likely sacrificed right there where she was laying. All right, let's finish up with achievements. One of the most amazing achievements of the Maya people is their calendar system. And the reason it's so remarkable is it was so very close to our calendar. In fact, it was 0.002% short of our calendar in terms of length. And a lot of people got kind of freaked out because their calendar ended in 2012, and a lot of people assume, well, the Mayas must have had something figured out, must have known something bad was going to happen in 2012. Well, what most people fail to realize is that their calendar just stops and restarts. And so it's sort of a rebirth, or another beginning. It's not an end, but a lot of people got excited. There was a movie made called 2012 where the world was ending and things. But obviously here we are in 2014, we're still alive. But their calendar, though, was really remarkable. It was definitely very accurate. Some of the buildings that they built in Tikal, you have Temple 4, which was very, very beautiful. It's 212 feet high. You also have the fact that they never used iron tools or wheels, that they were able to build all these magnificent temples without the use of modern equipment. So there's a lot of different achievements here. We could actually write the Temple of the Inscription. That was the building Peter Weller went into in Engineering an Empire. You put those water channels down as achievements. There's lots of different achievements here of the Maya people. One of the last things that's worth talking about here is this ball game. We don't know the rules, but we know that many of these Mayan cities had this ball court. In fact, the ball was made out of rubber, and I've even actually held one that was at the Science Museum, and they're very, very heavy. It certainly could cause a lot of damage, but a lot of people think that the ball game sort of helped choose who was going to be sacrificed. Again, we don't really know how because we don't know the rules of the game, but we know many of the cities actually had a court where this game was played. All right, so that brings us to the end here. We were able to look at a lot of different things: cities, environment, religion, economy, government, achievements, language, and writing. So we have plenty of information now that we can use to answer this question. So who were the Maya and what did they do? You should be able to take all the information from your chart now and answer that question quite completely. So that'll do it for us here. We'll see you next time when we talk about the Aztecs and then the Incas.